Downer is very proud to bring this podcast series to you. At Downer, our purpose is to provide the vital services that connect communities and enable them to thrive. We do this by assembling the best minds, harnessing the power of technology and our enduring relationships to deliver sustainable outcomes for all.
My name is Jo Taranto and I'm joined today by Kate Smith, a senior consultant, and Anthony Williams, Manager for Carbon Markets and Strategy, both at Aurecon, and we're talking carbon credits in the water sector. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks very much.
Good to be here.
Carbon credits, Anthony, tell me what they are and how they work.
A carbon credit represents 1 tonne of CO2, or the equivalent weight of another greenhouse gas, which has been either sequestered from the atmosphere or avoided from being emitted someplace in the atmosphere. The generator of the carbon credit basically has a property right to that credit, and they can sell that to another organisation which has polluted greenhouse gas emissions somewhere in the world and need to reduce their emissions. In Australia, the common type of the carbon credit is an ACCU, which is an Australian Carbon Credit Unit, and they're used for compliance purposes in Australia under the safeguard mechanism.
And Kate, how do you see carbon credits being used in the water sector?
Usually what happens is water utilities will have a target to get to net zero by such and such year, and they'll first work at quantifying what their emissions are, and then they'll work on options to reduce those emissions, sometimes with us, sometimes internally, and then they will identify the gap between the emissions that they are emitting and also how much they can reduce. And then there is generally a need to offset the gap with carbon credits to get to the net zero target. And the reason why there is generally a gap, and unfortunately at this stage of technology development, water utilities are unable to reduce to zero most of the time, is because water utilities are generally removing nitrogen, which is a nutrient that if it gets into the waterways, it's very harmful. And in the process of removing nitrogen, they produce nitrous oxide emissions, which is a harmful greenhouse gas. That's one of the main reasons why, and you can't actually reduce nitrous oxide emissions to zero if you are removing nitrogen. So that's one of the main reasons why utilities would consider carbon offsets as part of their strategy to get to net zero by whichever year that they're planning on.
And when an organisation comes to you to work with them, how early are you talking offsets? Is it from day one, or is it something that organisations want to talk about a little bit further into the process?
Often the first question is, how do we reduce? And potentially carbon offsets might be, we'll offset these remaining emissions with carbon offsets, but then that requires a later assessment of what kind of carbon offsets align with our values and what carbon offsets should we purchase and when. And Anthony will tell you definitely that we encourage people to look at all options at the same time to make sure that we can actually meet these targets, which are quite near, really, when you think about a lot of utilities have a 2030 target. So it's not really a question these days of waiting, approaching this one first and then doing that one. You kind of have to do everything at the same time.
What kind of choices are around for carbon credits, Anthony? You said that there is an ACCU. Is that a diverse mix of different types of credits?
Yeah, there's a huge range in the carbon market. Notionally, it's a commodity, 1 tonne of carbon dioxide equivalent. However, the reality is that they vary significantly, and that varies in terms of the price as well. So in Australia, we have ACCUs, which is a compliance scheme similar to what they have with NZUs in New Zealand and EUAs in Europe. But in addition to that, we also have the international voluntary market. So Vera and Gold Standard are 2 of the organisations which operate those programs. are primarily used by businesses who are voluntarily reducing their emissions. And amongst those, at a very high level, you've got a huge price disparity. But then within each of those programs as well, you've also got quite a lot of price stratification as well. And that will often depend on the method by which under which the credit has been generated.
Are there risks for the organisation with carbon credits when you're talking to them?
Yeah, there is a huge range of risk with carbon credits, and it really depends on the way you approach the market. Will depend on which set of risks apply to you. So, unlike many other markets, and certainly unlike most commodity markets, you have the option of buying through a market, through on the spot market or the forward market, buying already created certificates. Or you also have the option of creating them yourself, especially in Australia. This is an option. So it will depend on what your approach is. But if you're going down the route of self-generation or project origination, partnering with a project developer, project risk is a major issue there. So that's just the risk of all the things that can go wrong with implementation and operation. Another issue depending on the method. So some of them have got a more certain delivery profile than others. So volume risk, making sure that the project delivers the number of ACCUs or offsets that you need at the right point in time is a real issue. If you're going into the market, counterparty risk is always an issue. Making sure they're creditworthy counterparty who are able to generate those credits for you and deliver at the right time. Reputational risk is a really significant one. Carbon credits get a lot of negative publicity in the media, so reputational risk, and even businesses which have done a lot of research to make sure that the credits that they're buying are of a high quality, still run some of this reputational risk if when things are found out later down the track, or perhaps just accusations made as well. So that's a major consideration when we're developing an offset policy. And the last one, which I like to focus on a lot, because people tend to focus on those other things, especially if they're looking at developing projects, because it's a big, scary world out there. Stepping into this carbon world for businesses where this isn't their core capability. So those project risk, counterparty risks are the things that people tend to focus on. But the reality is, in the example we have with water corporations, where they have an absolute requirement for those offsets, they're currently exposed to market risk. And that basically means, so they've got a very large, what we'd call a short position. They've got a need for certificates, and they're exposed to changing conditions in the market and the changing price. So it really is an encouragement that we often emphasise that they need to consider that current short position, and that they need to engage with the market sooner rather than later.
You're listening to the Australian Water Association podcast series, and I'm speaking with Kate Smith and Anthony Williams from Aurecon. Are there other considerations for the water sector, particularly, Kate, that maybe don't apply to other industries, or are all industries facing the same opportunities and risks when it comes to carbon credits?
Well, given we're in Melbourne today, I would like to mention one particular special thing about the water sector in Victoria, which is that they have a statement of obligations, which is from the government. It's a requirement to get to net zero, and it has specific requirements on the offsets that they are allowed to purchase. In particular, and this is not the only requirement, but that they must be located in Victoria. So that would be a huge difference. That is Victoria specific. It's not necessary. It's not the case for utilities elsewhere, although utilities may have a preference. And the other thing is, when you're spending public money, you have a strong consideration, and there's certain ways that water prices regulated, and you need to make justification. You need to have willingness to pay from your customers for the various initiatives that you engage in. So that's probably a couple of the main things that affect the water industry that may not affect particularly other, private sector.
Anthony, what are the opportunities for water utilities, particularly when it comes to carbon credits?
Yet, carbon credit projects can also produce a lot of co-benefits as well, particularly at the higher value end of the spectrum, which generally are sequestration projects, and in particular, we're thinking about land-based projects. So some of the types of co-benefits which can be generated by a project would be in the example of an environmental planting methodology, which is mixed species, indigenous, permanent plantations. They generate biodiversity co-benefits. Also, they can produce, if they're produced in tandem with the agricultural sector, they can also produce water retention benefits, shelter belts as well. Particularly in the water sector, plantations around riparian areas can improve water quality and reduce sediment runoff.
What advice have you got for organisations who are maybe just starting or continuing their journey when it comes to carbon credits, Kate?
The advice that I'd have would be actually starting with emissions reduction, which is there is a little bit of a gap in technology in terms of we need to continue to develop technologies that can reduce our emissions and really understand that aspect. And then the other piece of advice would be to not assume at this stage of technology development that carbon offsets are not required. It is something that they need to think about if they are serious about getting to net zero, particularly by 2030, if that's their goal. And also they have to remember that that's also the deadline for a lot of organisations. So when you're all dealing with the same product at the same time, the cost will automatically go up, and that's something to think about. And that's something to think about because at the end of the day, they are serving the community, so they need to make these sensible business decisions and also have a positive impact on the environment. And this is all part of that.
And when it comes to the carbon markets aspect of it, it's really important that they undergo a thorough education program because as I've mentioned in terms of the different types of programs and the different methodologies and the different risks involved, this is not a normal commodity market. And it's really important that before they start to try and develop a strategy, they understand all of the different attributes, variables and risks involved with the market. And also associated with that as well, when they're seeking advice, it's really important that people understand that an ACCU is considered to be a financial product. And as a result, any organisation providing advice in relation to an ACCU needs to hold an Australian Financial Services Licence, or an AFSL.
It's great advice. I've been speaking with Kate Smith, Senior Consultant, and Anthony Williams, Manager for Carbon Markets and Strategy at Aurecon. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.